just want to share how I got launched on this journey. About 40 years ago, I was hired in my first job. And my first master's degree was in broadcasting. So I was hired to move television sets around the organization and set up the audio visual equipment. And that's how I was using my education. But it was for the training department. And my boss decided to go get her doctorate, and she dumped the entire department in my lap, said, "You can handle it." And my first assignment was management training. And so it was an accidental career, but it made me very curious on what is it that really lights people up and wants them to learn and grow inside an organization. So I'm going to share a little bit of what I've learned along the way. And what I have found is this question continues to change. So what we were finding, or what we thought that people wanted 20, 30 years ago, it keeps changing. It changes with the generations. It changes with our organizations become more global. So our communication is different. How we connect with each other is different. So you can't even just answer this one question. I'm sure if you look back at leadership books over the years, they keep saying different things. And what one very successful book, 5 years later, it doesn't apply anymore. It's not relevant. So the question of what do they want and expect from their cultures continues to evolve in this changing, really hybrid world. Well, I learned a number of things from the two companies then that I moved to after that first one that really helped me understand that it's not just about organizing people into teams that make decisions, but it's the conversations that they have with each other that makes the difference. So the company that I worked for after my first job was my first tech company. It was a company called ITT Courier. It no longer exists. But when I was hired by them, they were the world leader. Now, this is going to age me, but back in the day when we had dumb monitors attached to mainframes, Hendrik, right? And you think that wasn't that long ago, but a lot of people, the younger generation have no idea what I'm talking about. But we were the world leader. But what was happening was smart technology was coming into play. ITT actually had a personal computer, a PC, before IBM. They were the first, but it was a piece of junk. And I was in charge of international sales training. I was teaching people how to sell stuff that didn't work. So what had happened was they just assumed that they could create this new technology. Well, they were, but because there was, first off, the company was still functional departments, and the functional departments didn't talk to each other. And because of that, there was more conflict. They couldn't innovate together. They didn't collaborate. And then finally, because we were really starting to fail, we were sold actually twice, first to Alcatel and then to a group of Harvard MBAs that said, we know how to fix this problem, and divided the organization into cross-functional teams. Well, this was an organization of people who really didn't like each other. You know how that goes when you have very siloed departments. So they threw us together with no training, with no understanding of how to resolve our conflicts and to talk to each other. And they really didn't support us to make this change. They're like, okay, sit in this room and make decisions. Well, I jumped ship about a year before they went bankrupt. So within 5 years, they went from the world leader to not existing because they had the right idea of creating these work teams that would make decisions together, but they really weren't supporting the people and helping them to engage in the conversations that would help move them forward. Well, my next job then, I was actually hired the day of a layoff in a semiconductor corporation. And they said, well, they were a spin-off of General Instruments. And the investors said, make a profit in 6 months, or we're going to just close the doors and take the profit. Um, and so they hired me and said, well, we need to change the culture. We're going to change the product. We're going to change the market. But we need to change how people deal with each other and communicate. And so they just gave me a budget. It was a trainer's dream and said, help us to make this change. Well, it was really interesting because, again, they didn't know if they would be successful or not. They knew it was a grand experiment. But what they did was they divided the organization into cross-functional business units instead of functional departments. But they said, we know this is different, and so we're going to support you with really how do you communicate with each other? How do you support each other as individuals without losing individuality, but to come together as a team? And so we did a lot of team training, communications, conflict, and also provided support. So I would go in and I would work with the teams if there was problems, and I was doing what with the leaders, what I came to discover was really kind of coaching them to think through their problems and find their solutions. We also created a team council. So instead of leaders solving problems and making decisions, all the major teams had a delegate in the team council, and they would come to the council if there was problems on the team, and the council would then help them work through their problems. So they could do this without really having that leadership make the difference, make the decisions for them. What was amazing was in 3 years, the entire organization, and this was a global company, did turn around. And in 1993, we were the top revenue producing IPO in the United States. And they did this because they could quickly turn around and change because of the cross functional business units that were making the decisions. However, because they were shifting the culture, there was support that the conversations had to change, that how they respected each other had to change. We had factory workers along with top engineers in these teams, and they had to again respect the experience that everyone brought to the table. I was since the day I left. And so once we were successful, then they said, well, we don't have to do this anymore, and pretty much told me I hit the glass ceiling. There was no women above me. I decided it was time to move on. But the day I resigned, somebody sent me this article about this thing called coaching. And I'm like, well, this sounds like a lot of what I was doing with the teams and the team leaders. Um, but I didn't know there was such a thing, and I really wanted to learn how to do it. And so I joined a coaching school. It was 1995, so that's why I was able to be a part of developing the ICF. But my second master's was because I was doing all this new training and working with people. I went and got a master's degree in adult learning. So I've been curious about learning in the brain and how we learn. And so when I started learning coaching is when I went to get my doctorate, so I could learn how does coaching work in the brain. And I found that coaching is really the best learning technology we have. It is not a therapy. it's a learning technology. It's how we learn. It's how we think, how we learn. And it's based on helping people to think more broadly for themselves, whether it's individuals or it's teams. So I was passionate about coaching, and I immediately, as soon as I started my own business, I had companies start asking me, could you come in and work with our leaders to help them understand how to use coaching and help us to create these coaching cultures. So it was like an amazing shift right away that they were understanding that people needed to talk to each other differently. So, one of the things the ICF has done a lot of research on coaching cultures. And if you go on their website and look up PRISM Award, PRISM, you'll find years of the top companies around the world that have instituted coaching culture and case studies of what they did. But they have found that there's three modalities, that most of these companies did have external coaches to call on when it was needed, so they weren't isolated. But then they always had an internal pool of coaches. So even though there was work being done by teams, there was internal certified trained coaches to support the teams, to support the who was leading the teams. If there was, generally a team leader in most of these, very few of them I found that were leaderless. Uh, but yet, they can supply their own leadership. So, it's different structures in terms of teams, but that every employee in the organization understood coaching as a conversational approach, whether it was all the way from the factory through the teams, that how we addressed each other was with curiosity, with care, with respect. And that's what makes the difference in having teams be successful. Can we address each other with curiosity, with care and respect? And I know that there's some organizations that it's like they have this creative conflict, or uh, but I also have coached people in those organizations, and they say, well, but if there's not care and respect, it just dissolves into uh, destructive conflict. So I have found that in order to make these organizations work, it's the conversations that we have together that make them work. So one of the questions when I teach a coaching approach within organizations is I ask people, so what would you say is your most valuable contribution in the past 6 months? You can hear in their language if they really believe in what you're trying to create. So if they answer with sentences that start with I, they're still very individual focused. But if they say, this is what we did together, and even this is what they did, that this is where we start. When I start working with a leadership team that's shifting to a team culture, can they believe that teams can do this without them? Can they believe that? And then they can switch to the collaboration that's required in the teams. So, we were talking before this that in my experience, and I work with a lot of US companies and Asian companies, that it's aspirational to have organizations just run by teams. There's still, somewhat of a hierarchical structure, even if it's lean. But yet, more and more companies are interested in this. And I'm like, well, this is the shift. Can you be proud of what they do without you? And then you can start moving into creating the organization to be team-based. It really is a shift. It's not a change. If it's a drastic change, then you'll have like what we had at ITT. It may not work because you're changing mindsets and how we talk to each other, which takes a little time. But it's possible, and that's what I know that you've seen. But you see, we're still humans. We still don't want to lose our sense of self to the team. So even though I'm a part of this team, I still want to know that I have some control over my work. and I won't lose myself to the collective. Um, and I find this even with collective cultures. I said I do a lot of work in Asia, and I've been working with a Chinese coaching school and Chinese corporations for 13 years now. And we still have people that, but I still want to know what it is I can accomplish, not just the collective. I want to continually learn and grow as well as contributing to my team. But I have to know that I'm contributing to a larger purpose. We found that back at Microchip, that in order to shift to the team culture, there had to be a grander purpose. Now, Microchip technology, one of the things they did was they quit competing with Intel and decided just to make chips that went into small devices, like kitchen gadgets and toys. But what they did was they created a purpose that we're helping people's daily lives be easier and more productive. So everyone in the company knew that we were helping people around the world to have easier and more productive daily lives. So there had to be a strong purpose that we were all working toward together. This comes from the work of Daniel Pink. His first book, Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivation Is. It's not about money and titles. And so we can do away with the titles, but people still need to feel some autonomy, mastery, and purpose. If the shift doesn't happen like we had at ITT, then people are still stressing to prove themselves. Then they start questioning themselves. There's a decreasing motivation. We had people constantly leaving because they didn't want to be there. Or there was groupthink, that they would just make decisions in support of the group without really looking at all possibilities and allowing people to disagree. So how can we have these conversations where people feel comfortable disagreeing with the team? And this is why the training was so important to support the team structures. Now, the ICF has been measuring coaching cultures now for 20 years, so there's a lot of research about the importance of coaching as a conversational style, and even more so, I believe, in companies that are based in team structures. But there's a lot of research that you can find on their website. The industry research is free, that you can look at the difference when we integrate coaching conversations, the power it has within the organization to really make the shift and help people to expand their thinking, to learn and grow while they're working together. So again, I told you I went to get my doctorate to truly understand how does coaching work in the brain, because that's my, I'm a behavioral researcher. I needed to know this. And this is why I know that coaching is the most powerful learning technology we have, that when we engage each other at the coaching approach, that we help people and teams learn and grow. So you see, in the past, it was always telling people what to do. But when you tell people what to do, you're just dealing with cognitive short-term memory. They often don't remember the details, and then you get disappointed. And even if they believe that you're right when you tell them what to do, that doesn't necessarily change behavior. Because I want you all to think about it. How many of you know you should be doing something that is good for you, but you just don't do it? And every time I teach this, right? Yeah, raise your hand. Everyone raises their hand. Information doesn't change behavior. So just giving people information doesn't work. And then we have scaring people into change, which may work, but it then hardens them into, okay, I must do it this way, or something bad will happen. And so then we ask them to change, to now become teams and make decisions together, and they're like, no, but you told me I had to do it this way. And so it makes change very difficult. And to use the word feedback, and let me just say, the word feedback is one of the worst words we can ever use. That there's evidence that when you even say, can I give you some feedback, what happens in the brain is the same thing as if you held a gun to their head. Okay, it causes stress. Even if I ask you for feedback, I still like tighten up, so, or when you say, well, you're not a team player, you're not helping people. It's a threat. So what I found was that coaching works in the middle brain. It works on our stories. It helps us to see our stories, expand our thinking, to see new possibilities. And it's very motivating when people just, help us to think instead of tell us what to do. This is so critical when teams come to work together, that they understand how to use a coaching approach to their conversations. We become thinking partners to each other, and that's how I define coaching, is that I'm your thinking partner. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm not mentoring you. I'm just helping you see your thinking out here in a way you can't do for yourself, because our ego brain stops us from truly analyzing our thinking. That when we look at how you think out here, then you can start seeing, like, oh, maybe there's other possibilities. And, oh, right, that belief is getting in my way, or that fear, or that should I believed in before. So we take our stories, we coach people to look at their stories in an objective way. They have to see the story before they can change it. It's like, you tell people think outside of the box, but they can't see outside of the box till they see the box. It's the same thing. We want them to see outside of their story so they can see other possibilities. This is so critical when you're shifting how people make decisions together, that you're asking them to change their beliefs. You're asking them to change the stories they've been living by, and how they can be together differently. So it's so important that coaching is integrated at all levels. So we approach each other with this curiosity, this care, and respect. And this is the way people look inside their stories, which breaks the frame of what they thought before, so they can see themselves in the world in an entirely different way. So this is how I learned that coaching is what's called insight-based learning instead of fact-based learning or fear-based learning. That when we coach people, we help them to see beyond, to expand the view of themselves and how they see the world and their beliefs, who I am in this new environment. And then once I expand my thinking, my behavior changes along with my new stories, my new perspective, which is so required as we shift into new cultures. So we call this transformation, because transactional is just based on external, what should I do differently? The transformation is based on, how do I see differently? It's transforming, creating new thought, new ideas of who I am and how I see this situation. And if everybody uses a coaching approach in their conversations, then the growth becomes an everyday experience. Um, and people expect that their thinking is going to be challenged, but in a way that's respectful, not constructive criticism, because we really still aren't trained to accept criticism. But if I just say, this is what I hear you saying, how does that uh, impact the goal that we're trying to achieve? If I share with you what I hear you say, then ask you a question, it makes you think more broadly for yourself in a way that doesn't feel like an attack. So to contribute to a coaching culture, I often ask the question, what are you willing to give up? Are you willing to give up being the one who knows what's best for everyone else in order to be the coach? And again, to use a coaching approach, can we explore together and not necessarily be the expert? This is difficult because most of our lives we've been brought up with, our success depends on what we know. our expertise, our knowledge, and we must impart that on others. And I, being a teacher for 40 years, for me to even shift into a coaching approach, it was like I had to learn to do this. So I was coaching by phone long before Zoom, and so they couldn't see me going as I was shifting into being the coach from being the expert. Not an easy shift, in defining who we are. It's a value shift. I have to value that I'm helping people to learn and grow, to think more broadly for themselves based on the culture where we trust and honor each other. Um, and especially in this hybrid environment where people are remote and disconnected. I was doing a lot of research this past year on social disengagement. It's a real thing that Zoom doesn't solve it. That I'm still disengaged, and to understand how do we engage people to make them feel a part of this team, even if we're not physically together. It's not easy. We have to truly be curious, ask questions, honor each other, understand we're going through a shift. That's not easy, and not have an expectation people will make the shift just like that, just like that. So the question I'm always asking when I coach, what's getting in the way of this smart person from seeing a way forward? It's like when I coach, I want to know, where's the destination? Where are we going? But what does this person need to see a way forward? Not what I need to give them in terms of advice and information, but how can I coach them to see beyond the frames of the stories they're holding into new possibilities? And, I'm very clear as I teach leaders as coach, or team players as coach around the world. You don't have to be a certified coach in order to use a coaching approach. So I teach a coaching approach. I do believe all organizations should have a pool of well-trained coaches to support the teams, to help them to make the shift instead of expecting them to do it on their own. Back in the 1990s, it sounds so long ago, I can remember when Motorola first instituted self-directed work teams in the factories, and it failed. It seriously failed. They were just down the street from us and in the semiconductor world. And because they just said, okay, now make decisions on your own. And they really didn't support them. And these people had been dependent on other people telling them what to do and giving them direction. And to expect people just to give that up and make decisions together as teams is an unrealistic expectation. So they pulled back and first had meetings with all the employees and said, this is why we want to do this, because you're the expert in your area. You're the ones that know better than we do. And this is why we want to put you into the teams, and we're going to give you training on how to work together and how to support each other and inspire new ideas together. So they did a lot of training, a lot of work with the people who then became the self-directed work teams. And the second time around, it was far more successful. So again, you cannot make the assumption just that if you're going to reorganize, it's going to work. It's a shift. And that's why having an internal pool of coaches to help make the shift is really critical. So, to really work with the teams on making this shift. So in order to coach, you have to believe in the people you're with, so this is when I work with teams is, to get out of the mentality of uh, proving myself and being important to this team. But how can I look at the people I'm with and understand their knowledge and experience and respect that? What are they capable of discovering and achieving? And can I believe in them? This was a difficult thing at Microchip again when all of a sudden we had factory workers working with the process engineers and the product development people, and and really getting them to respect each other's experience no matter what educational background they had, what type of experience, that everybody brings something to the team. And so we want to approach each other with coaching instead of telling, which honors them as individuals. So I always ask people, who does most of the talking? Are you really listening? Or are you listening just to know what you're going to say next? So using a coaching approach is we help them to see their stories by reflecting their words, emotions, expressions, and then ask questions. So, one of the things, my last book, Coach the Person, Not the Problem, I wrote it because, over the years, I've seen coaching kind of devolve into these myths of what coaching is. And how many people think coaching is just about asking questions? It's like, no, it's not. It was never intended to be that. That reflection is just as important, if not more important, than the question. It's the reflection and then the follow up question that helps people to see their thinking. There was a guy, an educational reformer, who wrote a book in 1910 called How We Think. He wanted teachers to get students to think more broadly for themselves by just sharing back the stories, when they say, this is what I think, which was usually what their parents thought. They would just say, so here's what I hear you believe. Is there any other possibilities? Getting them to think about what they're saying so they can see beyond their own thinking. He defined coaching in the book How We Think in 1910. So understanding reflective inquiry is about using reflection. So when somebody says something, instead of disagreeing and saying, okay, so here's what I hear you saying that you believe is the way we should go. So what brings you to that decision or that assumption? What is it that you're most afraid of going down a different path? So we use the reflection first and then ask the question. So we help people to see their thinking with reflection. I'm really, really passionate about bringing this back into the definition of coaching, that it's the reflection that's so important. And anybody can do this. You don't have to be a certified coach in order to use this. So this is the exercise that I tend to share with people, is to practice just receiving what people say without judgment, appreciate their experience, their thoughts, then reflect and explore. Reflect and explore. Help them to see their thinking. Then you can ask the questions that will help them to see beyond how they think right now. So, in order to do this, the basic skills is we have to give up knowing what's the right way to go, to give up knowing the answer so we can use the collective wisdom of the team, but to be curious always and to believe in the potential of everyone, that every person on this team is creative, resourceful, and whole. This is the essentials of how to shift an organization to a coaching culture. And the transition isn't easy, is what I've been saying. One class is not going to do it. This is why we have to support cultures as they make the shift into teams and using coaching to develop each other. So it requires a change in the culture, which is how people think and behave. It's their communication. If you listen to the communication in the team meetings, in the hallways, that's the culture, not what's up on the walls. So, the what has to happen is that all employees have to come value coaching. And this is why we bring coaching into all the conversations. It's available to everyone. It's not just a pool of certified coaches. There needs to be a budget for this. and internal support, and all three modalities. That, external support of trained coaches to call on when needed needs to be there as well, so the organization isn't isolated. So this is why I love working with organizations to bring this in, that you have all three. So the questions to ask is, as people are moving into this culture, is what do you expect to accomplish with coaching? Because there has to be measurable results to maintain the budget. Is the organization ready to devote the time, the energy, and the money to making the change? And what will motivate everyone to support the shift? So again, I encourage you to go on to the ICF website and look at the PRISM Award winners. There's things that they've done. They always align coaching with strategic objectives. There's a measurement. And generally they do a pilot. They start with one team to model and share successes, which motivates other teams to do this as well. So there's always, again, a team of internal coaches to support the shift with the teams. And there has to be sufficient training and follow-up. Training is just an event. That's why you want internal coaches to support what people learn in the training. Otherwise, they just go back to old behavior after the class as soon as it feels awkward. I always say training doesn't work. Take it from me, who's been a trainer for 40 years. If you don't have support to integrate the training over time, there's no ROI. So all team members, besides just a coaching approach, coaching presence, how do I create trust and safety, what to listen for, how to use reflection, and emotional intelligence. To develop the emotional intelligence of everybody is critical, because it's the emotions I bring to the conversation and my presence that's even more important than what I say. So hopefully this encourages you to make a plan, or to help your organizations make a plan, and to remember that coaching is not just a skill. It's a way of connecting and engaging minds through powerful conversations.